Welcome to the ICAS Expert Voices Initiative. This series, formerly known as the American Voices Initiative, features candid, in-depth conversation with leading experts on most pressing issues shaping the US-China relationship. As part of this initiative, we're proud to launch a special segment, the Global Trade Intention Series. This new series comes at a time when global trade frictions are once again intensifying, not only between the United States and China, but also across major economies like Europe, Canada, Mexico, and so on. Tariffs remain a key flashpoint, but the challenges now go further, much further. Export control, capital restriction, the very uncertain future of the WTO, and even the broader question about the fate of globalization itself. In a world of shifting trade relationship and fragmented norms, it's more important than ever to understand how different economies view these tensions, what drives their concerns, what they hope to achieve, and what compromises they're willing to make. Through these conversations, we aim to bring you expert insights from a range of national perspectives, helping us all better understand where things stand and how we might chart a more stable course forward. We invite you to listen, reflect, and engage with us on social media. So to kickstart our Global Trade Intention series, we invited Mr. Thomas König to join us to provide a German perspective and even a broader an EU perspective. Mr. König is the Director, Asia Pacific Conference of German Business with Focus in China at DIHK, which stands for the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Through Mr. König's work in China and the European Chamber of Commerce in China, in Beijing, and the world's largest German Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, which serves more than 1,500 member companies, Mr. König has gained deep insights into German-Chinese trade and economic relations, as well as issues affecting Sino-European relations. Mr. König holds a bachelor's degree from Yale University and master's degree from the London School of Economics and the School of Oriental and African Studies. He completed a bilingual semester at Peking University, gained years of experience in the think tank world as Asia Program Coordinator at European Council of Foreign Relations in London and Paris, and developed training program for Chinese UN diplomats at the United Nations Institute of Training and Research in Geneva. So, herzlich willkommen, Thomas. Shall we get started? And let's just provide our audience with a basic state understanding. How would you characterize the current state of economic relationship between Germany or the EU at large with China? Why do you think that, in recent years, the mood has suddenly turned into a more intensive, and especially given that, the EU and Germany has traditionally enjoyed a rather benign trade relationship with China since the 1980s?
First of all, thank you so much for having me, and also it's such an honor to be able to kick off this new series. I will do my most to, do it justice. And first of all, I'm talking to you right now from the Technical University in Berlin because I'm also teaching a class here, very appropriately titled "The World Economy at the Crossroads." And together with my students, we're also trying to figure out how to make sense of the current, crises, plural, that we're all living through. And I had the pleasure of meeting you, of course, in March in Washington, D.C. personally, and now I'm talking to you here from Berlin. And a couple of months have passed, and a lot of things have happened. But like you said in your question, let me also just take you back a little bit further to kind of see how we ended up where we are now. In general, I think it's very important to kind of keep in mind that, beginning around 2020 in the German political sphere there and political sphere in Germany, but also, of course, in Europe, there had been a little bit of a rethinking when it comes to our overall engagement with China. If you look at the mere economic numbers that were also just as right in 2020, of course, the EU-China relationship and the China-Germany relationship was robust as ever, with China as one of the most important trading partners for the EU, and for many years the most important trading partner of Germany. And I'm not going to, at least right now, get too deeply into the business community in China, the German business community, and the decades-long economic relationship that both countries enjoy. But what is important is basically that the business community in a lot of ways was on track to kind of continue this kind of relationship. Investment numbers were looking stable, and the journey seemed to be a relatively stable one. Of course, noting that there are certain conditions on the Chinese market for German companies that we keep on addressing to the Chinese government and stakeholders as well. Of course, there's business challenges that German companies particularly are facing on the Chinese market, but none of those seemed, at least too much of a trouble, and ultimately, seem to be something that, with dialogue and engagement, would be, we would be able to, address and hopefully also resolve. What happened then around 2020, and of course, we all remember, of course, the global pandemic, which, of course, in a lot of ways changed our outlook on a lot of things. But in general, there's also been more of an awakening towards not just China, the dragon in the room in a lot of ways, but of course, the countries surrounding the dragon in the room in the Middle Kingdom, and the need for potential diversification of markets, and of course ensuring that quality made in Germany is available on as many markets as possible. And that in itself is not a revolutionary idea, and also not an idea that is foreign to German companies anyway, because the German economy is highly diversified and has been one of the major export drivers in the world for decades. But what has been new is that the political side as well looked a little bit more closer at the Indo-Pacific. I think it's important for everyone to keep in mind the key documents that have come out in the recent years are, on the one hand, the German and also the European Indo-Pacific guidelines, the supply chain law, which came out in 2022, and then the China strategy of the German federal government, the now former federal government. It was released in July 2023. And looking at those three documents, I think they quite clearly outline that there has just been a shift in, first of all, attention that is being paid to China, and also how we see and how we perceive China in the political sphere. And there has been, I have to say, also from my business perspective, of course, a deterioration of the view of our relationship with China. And, also, I think there has been also a lot of rethinking in terms of, there is three categories how, the European Commission, for example, defines China as, a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. And I'm happy to get into, my opinion on what I think of those categorizations. But, I just want to give you some overview of how China is perceived. And those categories kind of showcase as well that those are the driving forces between how we perceive China. So, of course, we think of China as a big market. We think of, the significant economic relationship that we have. But there's also, political considerations and also security concerns, quite frankly, I think is how I would, describe it, that have come up. And of course, a lot of the reasons why we also talk about diversification so much, also in China strategy, is of course Russia's war of aggression on the Ukraine. That was a very important watershed moment in the German and European psyche. It all of a sudden showed a lot of vulnerabilities. It was an uncomfortable realization for a lot of European partners, and of course for Germans as well. And with that new reality, I think Germany or the German political sphere turned to developing a new vocabulary. And this is basically where we then now are. We are in a period of, I would say, a little bit of, let's just say, we were in that period until the end of last year, for sure, where, the relationship had cooled down a little bit. Exchange formats were, not at their all-time high. Yes, there were state visits, but for example, the number of members from the business delegations were also, rather low, not because for a lack of want, but also because, there were some political decisions that kind of made it more realistic to have smaller business delegations traveling with, the chancellor or with the Minister of Economic Affairs. So it was basically a cooling off period, quite frankly, a cooling off period to maybe allow Germany to also reassess what their actual interests are when it comes not just to China, but, the world at large. So a period for self-reflection. And that self-reflection certainly has caused a little bit of, moving away from deeper engagement with China, at least on a political sphere. Like I mentioned before, the business relationship has been continuously developing. Yes, of course, the global pandemic didn't help. And yes, of course, there were insecurities. But overall, if you also look at our, surveys that we generally conduct, it is a robust economic relationship with still potential for growth and, with continued interest to invest in China. So this is also like what makes my job so interesting. I try and I do think I see both sides. I see the understanding, where the political and the economic relationship can converge, but also where they kind of maybe see things a little bit differently, and making sense of both those sides and kind of putting into a context, and at the same time finding workable solutions for prosperous and pragmatic China Germany and China Europe relationship is also part of my job. And it's not easy, but I also have to say, like I said, the relationship is the way it was like until the end of last year. And we are now basically talking when we're entering potentially a new period where, and I'm happy to get into that as well, because I don't want to just monologue the whole time. Perhaps you also have a follow-up question. And I think I'll just leave it here for now as an introductory answer.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you, Thomas. I think that's a very solid background context for both myself and our audience. But just to follow up, as you predicted, I have follow-up questions for you.
Sure.
Just to follow up, yes, I do understand that with potential policy change and administration change, there might be a certain period of reflection or certain adjustment. But I hate to talk on the downside, but the recent news report doesn't necessarily show it that way. We actually saw that just recently the EU canceled its high-level economic and trade dialogue with China. While you said that yes, we have a very strong trade foundation, right? We have robust trade ties, but there doesn't seem to be any further room to push forward for the trade relation to further development as the two sides sees embassy across various issues, including EV tariffs, rare earths export control, these type of things. So do you think there is still room for meaningful improvement of this economic cooperation between China and the EU? For example, to revise some kind of deeper foundational work like the comprehensive agreement of investment, or do you think that this part goes, the specter is still haunting us, that the framing of China as a systemic rivals close the door completely? What's your take on that?
Door is never completely closed, and I will do my utmost to keep the door as open as it can be. I have to tell you quite honestly, like again, we're talking right now where you could also say, yes, this is not great. This is not a high point. This is perhaps even a low point in terms of engagement and like how the relationship has been developing. But from here on out, you can only go upwards, I think. And that's why I am quite optimistic. It is you're absolutely right. Export controls, for example, are the dominant topic right now. It's also, by the way, the topic that keeps me busy, simply because, like there's a lot of companies that are calling Mr. König to basically say, hey, we need access to germanium or to wolfram or what have you. And due to the export controls, we are not able to conduct our usual business, or we only have like a reserve of 2 weeks worth of those resources. So what are we going to do? Which then, of course, thankfully, I have a very good network and helps me to, like at least on a case-by-case basis, try to help companies as much as I can. However, it's of course clear that we can't do this forever, and we can't do this on a case-by-case basis. We need to find a solution on broader terms, and that's the thing anyway. We need to kind of move away from the case-by-case, looking at China, like in a very particular way. In certain cases, we need to think bigger, and we also find more overarching solutions to the challenges that are perceived in the relationship with China, which of course necessitates dialogue. So of course the most important thing is that we need to engage with each other. We need to continue to engage with each other. Talks getting canceled right now here or there, that's not a great sign. I will agree with you on that. But ultimately, I do think that there is also, considering what is currently happening in the United States, there is at least, first of all, something that I observe is a little bit of an awakening in the European spirit of their own interests, which, we've always had interests, but I think we're now kind of waking up to the fact that it's completely fine to be confident and self-confident about that we have our own interests and communicating those to our partners. And also, feeling maybe emboldened enough to, not only invest more in defense, which, of course, is in this current climate probably a sensible necessity, but also to kind of take stock again and reflect again on, where we want to take one of our most important economic relationships, the relationship with China. The CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, for example, was, in January when we, if we did talk in March, but, if you talked to me in the beginning of the year, I would have told you that the CAI is completely dead in the water and there's no way for moving forward. Despite what, with cancellations might be happening, at least in my professional context, we are also with bureaucrats and also with German counterparts, we're talking about the CAI again, and at least the possibility of it or exploring it. So, this exploratory phase that we're currently in is actually like a reason for hope on the European side, but also like an opportunity for kind of, we might end up, changing tack ultimately as well on the European side. But I think we are also reassessing our assessment of China in that sense as well. So that's why I'm saying the door is still open. We do need to find concrete issues. We need to resolve concrete issues like export controls. The EV debate, we also still need to find a solution here as well. I mean, we have outstanding issues that need to be addressed before we can then maybe move on to the next phase. But ultimately, I think, the long laundry list of issues that we need to discuss ultimately also points towards the fact that, yeah, we want to try solutions and we want to find solutions for those very, complicated issues. And so that's why I'm saying I remain hopeful. Of course, we probably should have a follow-up at the beginning of next year to see where we stand, because everything, quite frankly, is also very much in flux. Things that I thought were, a given 2 months ago are, not anymore. But just to add the United States perspective into it as well, we are also reassessing. Europe is also reassessing its relationship with the United States, and also perhaps redefines what we can achieve with the United States or what we can achieve without the United States. Just as it's justified to also as Europeans to also think about where are the areas of excellent cooperation with the Chinese side. What, for example, falls under critical infrastructure where we would not work with the Chinese anymore for security reasons. I mean, there's no harm in defining your own interests. And I think also our Chinese partners and friends would also appreciate that. And so that's what I'm hoping we are moving towards. We are reassessing, we're taking a step back. Perhaps we're canceling some debates and discussions. We're on our own defining what our own interests are in this new geopolitical climate that we're in. And then hopefully, we're reaching out and we will say, this is where we are. And hopefully we'll find avenues of cooperation once we have also resolved those very real, trade issues that are currently happening. But those are also, I mean, hopefully temporary. And they are not, I think, an harbinger of what's to come. Ideally, they might be, like a blip that are painful, but that we can certainly move past.
Glad that you brought up first of all, you brought up the United States, and second, you brought up this very important point that I really want to call back first, that you said that the EU is at large in general at a point of reflection. My follow-up question is essentially, has there been a clear consensus among the European nations that, of course, Germans playing a very important role, but also among the other EU states, has there been a consensus formed as to where does the EU prioritize in areas working with Beijing, or based on their long-lasting grievances towards certain issues that Beijing has, what are the areas that they really that they genuinely hope that Beijing to improve? And like you said, like key infrastructures, apart from the key infrastructures, what are the other potential industries that Europe has already made a consensus that they don't want, they just want to de-risk from Beijing?
Consensus in Europe is always difficult. That's one of the inherent challenges of a supranational entity such as the European Union. And I think we have to be realistic about it as well. So, and again, of course, I do not speak on behalf of the European Commission or the European Union. However, I am a European citizen, and so I have opinions. But ultimately, I think what's important to keep in mind is that yes or no, there are no concrete, documents or lists where everything is listed or clearly defined, even though we should have them. But what I can confirm is that the thinking, to an extent that I've never seen before, is happening. And I think that's already encouraging. And, again, I'm not going to prescribe to the European Union what they have to do, what they don't have to do when it comes to China. But, would rather frame, our relationship with China as in, I don't know, like the Vision 2050 for EU China slash Germany China cooperation, rather than, what kind of feels a little bit defensive, like a China strategy, which, kind of seems to be very, like I said, reactive and defensive in its like in its outlook. You're all welcome to Google the China strategy of the federal government and have a look at it for yourself. I think that particular document just does not contain a lot of concrete proposals for bettering the relationship overall. And when we talk about what can we improve or where can we cooperate, I mean, there is, of course, we have our established industries, we have machineries, we have the car industry. And, I'm not going to get too deeply into the car industry because the car industry also needs to do a lot of soul searching through the China shock that it has experienced. But you have services, you have the chemical industry, you have the, production facilities in all those industries. Those traditional industries, they're there and they will continue to be an important player as well. But of course, we need to look ahead as well. I mean, China is, of course, also an innovation driver. Again, our numbers from our surveys also kind of confirm that also the German business community sees that China is an increasingly more important driver of global innovation, and that it also pays for German companies to be in China, for example, for that very reason. Because if you want to be in the think tank where, the lab where the innovation happens, then you have to be in China. And I think that is a consensus that, like at least of a lot of members of the business community will agree with, which of course then opens the door to medical devices, to, research, to, AI in all its applications. I'm not talking about language models. A big issue, by the way, for universities, learn language models, and how do you even grade a paper nowadays? But now, of course, I'm talking about the other applications of that. I'm talking about Industry 4.0 and production facilities. Basically elevating a lot of the processes that we are currently doing. China is an excellent partner for that, and it's a proven partner for that as well. So let's build on those issue areas. And of course, at the same time, Germany and Europe, we have a lot to offer when it comes to green technologies, when it comes to energy transition, when it comes to green building, and all of that. So, the general consensus always was, Germany and China had such a special relationship because the economic systems in a lot of ways were complementary in the sense that we had what China needed to grow, and China happily took it on. Now we are in a new phase where, of course, China is also, in a lot of ways, becoming a very viable competitor and sometimes also overtaking us. So we also need to see, so how can we now enter this next phase of collaboration as well, to, also, jumpstart the next generation of innovation as well, together with China. And I think that kind of consensus that, there is no way around China in that sense, and I try to phrase it positively, is I think that consensus has reached not only the business community, but of course also the political sphere. Now it's a question of, again, leveraging that against, of course, protecting national interest. And you asked, have we defined our critical infrastructure? The German government right now, for example, is working on the next edition of the China strategy, the next edition of the national strategy. So I'm hopeful that, the next editions will contain much clearer language, which also will ultimately help our Chinese partners, because then they know what areas there are for cooperation and which aren't. I mean, China has the negative list for investments as well. It's decreasing. The investment areas where foreign companies cannot invest is ever shrinking, and that's commendable. But that kind of approach, basically, as well, we don't need a negative list, but we just need a clearer idea of what our critical infrastructures are. And I think we're on the way towards achieving that. But again, how do we achieve this best? By talking to the Chinese side as well. And all of this is, of course, excluding current issues like export controls and all of those other things, like I said in the previous answer. But I'm trying to look ahead, and I'm also trying to look ahead not to the next 5 years. I'm actually thinking about, what is the China-Germany relationship going to look like in 2080? I'm bold enough to kind of think of where we're going to be, and not just imagine what amazing technology is going to be there, but also what are the interdependencies going to look like? How are our economic systems going to be integrated? What kind of cooperation potential is there? What kind of knowledge exchange is there? So I think it would also help if Europe is asking, to kind of think a little bit more ambitiously towards the long-term future, and then to kind of go from there and backtrack and kind of see, okay, so what do we need to achieve this kind of thing? And like, of course, I can tell you for the German market and of course for Germany as well. Right now in 2025, it's not like the German economy is thriving. We are, most likely also going to be experiencing our third year of the recession, even though the new government is everything they're trying in their power to kind of prevent that. The labor market is a problem. We have a shortage of skilled labor. Like I said, I'm teaching a class at a technical university. Young engineers, they're not necessarily maybe staying in Germany. Quite frankly, a lot of them are very interested in coming to China. And that's encouraging for the German-Chinese relationship. But, it also, we have to think about how we make Germany more attractive as well in the long run, excluding China, excluding United States or, other European nations. What does Germany also just need to be a more attractive business location again? Because this is also like, this also factors into our approach to China as well. Where are our weaknesses, and where, can we learn from China, and where can we maybe in a lot of ways also kind of jumpstart the German economy as well. And I here too see, of course, potential for the German startups as well, but also for very traditional German businesses to continue to thrive with their China business.
I think that's very, very positive note, and I would probably not say that I'm as bold as you to think about the things happen in 2080, but I should start dreaming about that, especially hearing about your point that the European economic model, but especially the German economic model, is somehow very complementary with the Chinese economic model. I think it is important for not just the German side to start reflecting, but also for the Chinese side to start reflecting how to make sure that the two economic system can actually complement each other, well, to promote joint prosperity, but also we all have our critical interests, so we need to make sure that our critical interest remains intact. So there's a lot of work to do, and I think engagement and dialogue is definitely serves a very important first step. So it might be a little bit hurtful to hear that cancellation of high level dialogues and such. But now let's shift the topic a little bit, because we kind of hint at the United States for quite many times, but we haven't directly discussed about that. Like you just said that there's a lot of things that the European Union may actually share with the United States, with regard to relative export control that China has, but also like in some of these areas that you mentioned, in the green energy area where the European Union may actually have more or less some kind of like a competing, or just like there's not clear connection of interest between the EU and the US on this regard. While as for China and the EU, like you said, there might be a lot more shared interest, and in some of the frontier industries like AI, we actually see that the European Union and the United States are more at odds with each other with regard to how things should be regulated, how data should be governed, or even to the more bottom line, how digital text should be collected. So and putting that in the context of the ongoing trade tension between the United States and Europe since April or even earlier, how do you see this Trump shock since President Trump returned to the White House? Do you see that the Trump shock has given the European Union more of a sense of vulnerability towards the United States, and does that provoke any potentially different idea other than we should always be following and cooperating with the United States on economic issues, promoting free market and liberal orders. But is that possible for the Europeans to, give more active thoughts to potentially using China as a hedging element to, promote its own interests?
The important thing about, like I spent March in Washington, D.C. to really look at the US-China relationship, but again, also to really think about how Germany or Europe even factors into it. And, like we had a wonderful conversation that also really helped me to kind of get a better understanding as well. And I think one important thing, even including the US Trump shock, is that, like, again, looking at empirical numbers, looking at trade numbers, looking at interdependencies, the United States is an incredibly important partner to the European Union, is an incredibly important partner to, Germany. I'm personally, yes, I'm not only European, but I'm also a very, a hardcore transatlantist. I believe in that relationship. I believe in the history behind it. But again, having said all that, we are, again, in uncharted territory in a lot of ways. And, like you asked whether, this kind of shock is also, exposing a certain vulnerability to the European Union. I try to, again, you're not going to be surprised, to spin it positively. I think, again, it is shocking. And yet it gave us a chance to kind of really assess, like in any good relationship as well, where we actually stand. Define the relationship. What do we mean to each other? Where do we need each other? Just like we need to do it with China, we also now, more than ever, need to do it confidently with the United States as well. Because again, the economic reality is one thing, but of course also, where we can head or what we can do together or achieve together and politically is a very pertinent and necessary question to ask ourselves. And, again, not thinking just about China. If we just think merely about the European relationship with the United States, like I said, there are very good economic arguments, there's historic arguments, there is, potential, and there will be continue to be potential, no matter who is in the White House, for, those both, for European Union and for America to continue to cooperate with each other. However, maybe perhaps a little bit more on our terms as well, I say, as a European. Maybe there has been a little bit of, faith, too much blind faith in, that the United States will just, always work in our interest as well. Maybe there has been a little bit of that complacency. Complacency is never good. And again, while emphasizing how important the relationship with the United States is, I hope that, like all of those shocks are also like an opportunity for Europe to kind of, again, use it to better understand what we bring to the table. And I think this is ultimately what I'm taking from all of this. I'm seeing a more open assessment of what we have to offer, which is a lot. Europe is an incredibly dynamic and an interesting market, and is a great investment destination. And like also on marketing terms, maybe we need to be a little bit better to market ourselves differently to the rest of the world as well. So because quite frankly, like during my research, what I was doing in Washington D.C. as well, funnily enough, when I was talking to a lot of American counterparts, a lot of them would tell me, oh, well, Germany's in the pocket of the Chinese, right? We cannot really take you seriously because you're so on the side of the Chinese, that, you're not really a trustworthy partner. And that was shocking to me that this is also the perception of Germany because, this balancing act that I've been describing throughout my answer so far is, certainly not easy. But I think Germany has been doing quite well in terms of trying to be on as many markets as possible and to positively contribute to the markets that we invest in and where we are, because there's this concept of the honorable merchant that German business people follow, where they try to positively impact the markets where they invest and where they stay. And it was interesting to me to hear that kind of perspective as well of how we are being perceived. And, I would just say then, okay, then let's take that assessment seriously. Let's understand where this perception comes from. Do we agree with this assessment? And how is this going to basically affect then our relationship with US-China, US-Europe, but also Germany and Europe and China? What are the lessons that we're basically taking from this, from us? And I think there are some lessons that we can take from this, including the one where we basically have to say that ultimately, this is not, like a question of either China or either United States or, like picking any sides. It's ultimately what will benefit us as, Germany and Europe most in the long term, and where can we gain, and also, but where can we also positively impact the most? And that again, and I keep saying it, that requires us to openly reassess our weaknesses and our strengths, and then basically communicate those to our partners. But do it confidently, and then it's up to our partners to decide if they want to continue to work with us, or if they don't, or if they see a convergence or a divergence of interests, and then to basically build on that. But ultimately, I think when it comes to the United States, we can afford to be confident, but again, we can confidently reach out. We should not move away from the United States. We should continue to look, just like with China, for where we can find common ground.
I think it was a very insightful conversation, Thomas, and I think you set the tone for this new series very well. Two very important things. First, we should always remain optimistic. We should always look up the upside, and also we should dream big. We should look long, we should look further. Maybe dream about 2080. Maybe dream about 2090. And the second most important thing, like you said, I think not just for the European Union, not just for Germany itself. All those countries that are experiencing trade tensions around the world needs to do two things. First, They have to take a step back and reassess where they stand. What are the most important areas for them? What are the most important issues that they cared about? And the second most important thing is that they need to express and communicate that well with their trading partners, so that everyone have a better understanding where they stand and where each of these players care about. That would perhaps first provide a platform for each of us to continue to talking to each other again. And second, that might actually create a path that we can move forward together. I think in general, that was a very insightful and very, very informative conversation, Thomas. Thank you so much.
It was my absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And to review our to continue to our trading global trade intention series, we will continue to interview other experts around the world, and we continue to invite everyone to stay tuned. Thank you.